Hello, everyone. John Pisalis here again from Realosophy Realty. Thanks again for joining. Today, I want to take a closer look at Toronto's or the GTA's condominium rental market. Why rents are falling. So rents are falling for those of you who haven't been keeping a close eye on the rental market, and why that trend actually might continue into the first half of 2024, and take a look at whether it might even continue beyond that. So that's what we're going to look at today. As always, if you have any specific questions, you can always email me at askjohn@movesmartly.com. If you want to set up a meeting with me, one of my agents, to talk about your own real estate needs, you can click the link in the show notes below. So let's kick off by taking a look at average rents for condominiums in the GTA going back to 2012. And we can see, of course, rents have surged in the GTA. They dipped during COVID. And then they peaked basically in the summer of 2023. The average rents in the GTA for a condominium hit about $3,000 per month. Since then, they have declined. Rents, it's pretty common for rents to dip a little bit in the second half of the year, but this is above what we would expect seasonally. And of course, the question is, well, why did rents decline so significantly in the second half of the year? And when we looked at the data, really what's going on is we saw a flood of condo completion. So when we look at the number of condos completed in the second half of 2023, so it's the last 2 quarters, and compare that to the second half of every previous year going back 20 plus years, we see a very big difference. In 2023, we had over 16,000 condos completed. In a typical year, we might see closer to around 8,000. So we had twice as many condos completed in the GTA. And of course, because many of these condos are bought by investors who intend to lease them out, we saw a flood of new listings. When we look at the number of condominium rental listings in the second half of 2023 compared to the second half of 2022, listings were up significantly in most regions. Durham actually declined, so they probably didn't see a ton of new completions, whereas Halton and Peel saw the biggest increase, over 50%. York about 35-ish, 36, and Toronto in the mid-20s. And when we look at the concentration of these rental listings, I mean, this kind of really tells a story. If we look at the number of buildings with at least 50 new rental listings in the second half of 2023 versus the second half of 2024, we can see a huge difference. In 2022, there were about 13 buildings with more than 50 new condo rental listings compared to 32 buildings in 2023. And similarly, if we take that one step further and say, well, how many buildings had at least 100 new rental listings? And again, comparing the second half of 2023 versus the second half of 2022, there were 2 buildings in 2022 compared to 11 buildings with more than 100 rental listings in the second half of 2023. So that, of course, really contributed to this surge in listings. And then when we compare the number of leased condos, so this isn't just about, this is the increase in sort of listings is one thing. We got to look at sort of the activity. And the reality is, listings are up leases are up. So the number of transactions are up. So if we look at Halton Peel, they're up 20, 25, 26, 27%. Toronto leases are up only about 5%. So we are seeing more condos being rented, but there's a big disconnect. When we look at the new listings, there's probably about 9,000 more new listings than we're used to seeing in the second half of the year, whereas lease transactions only went up by about 2,500. And of course, that has resulted in an increase in the number of active listings. And when we look at the percentage change in the number of active listings, we can, of course, see some very dramatic differences. And we're doing percentage changes here rather than numbers because Toronto's just outsizes everyone. The charts would look ridiculous if we looked at actual number of units, but I'll try to unpack them. So, I mean, Halton and Peel had the biggest percentage increase. Halton at 140% increase. So last year, Halton had, and I should say, actually, this is the active listings for January now. So we're just looking at last month's data, not looking at Q2, Q3, and Q4 of last year. So just the active number of condo rental listings in January of 2024. Halton had 190 in Jan of 2023 and 445 active rental listings for rent in 2024. Peel is up over 140%. Again, similarly, last year they had about 350 condos available for rent. This year, 850. So huge increase, 500 more units for rent in Peel region, of course, is going to put pressure on the market. This isn't a small number. And similarly, Toronto last year had about 3,200 condos available for rent in January. This year, 6,300. So, this is having a massive impact on pricing and how long units are sitting on the market, and how many showings they're getting. Certainly far fewer showings because there's a lot more to choose and to look from in terms of rentals if you're a tenant. So when we look at the change in average condominium rents, what I wanted to look at is the change from the third quarter of 2023. I mean, really July of 2023, so the start of the third quarter compared to the start of this year. Because if we look at year-over-year trends, average rents are actually relatively flat. There's not a big difference, but that doesn't capture the fact that between sort of the start of last year to the summer of 2023, rents actually accelerated. So if we just look at what has happened over the past 6 months, Halton has seen the biggest decline in rents, followed by Toronto at around just over 7%, and Peel behind that. And even York and Durham have seen slight declines as well. So we're seeing average rents dip, and will this trend continue? And the reality is it's looking like it will. When we look at a report from Urbanation, sort of the condominium research firm that tracks new condominium completions and units under construction, they noted in a recent report that they're expecting a record high 27,000 units to be completed in 2024. And of those, 18,000 are scheduled for the first half of the year alone. So we're probably going to see another surge in completions, and will likely lead to another spike in condominiums listed for rent. So this supply that we're seeing, or oversupply in the market, could very well continue easily for the entire year, because if we see a flood in the first half of this year, it's going to take a while for the markets to absorb all that inventory. So another question, of course, I got is this like a longer term trend? Have we solved our housing crisis and our rental crisis? And the reality is no. What's going on here is Toronto's not overbuilding. It's not like we have an oversupply of rentals. We have a supply shock where a lot of units are being completed in a short period of time. And in particular, during a time when the rental market is slower. The winter months and the start of the year are typically the slowest seasons for rentals. It's the toughest time to rent a property. So we're seeing a flood of supply when the demand's generally the lowest. And it's going to take some time for the market to absorb that. So we might see some pressure on rents. We might see rents dip a little bit. But there's a couple of things to keep in mind, whether you are a renter or an investor. I mean, the thing is, if it is a newer building, and both tenants and investors should be aware of this. The reality is, even if you lock in a reduced rents today and you think you're getting a good deal, the reality is that the market rebounds a year from now, rents increase. Landlords can increase the rents as much as they want. So the landlords or investors of the units, especially, I mean, in particular, if they're newer completed, obviously, because there's no rent control on new completions, are going to be taking a small hits today, but are likely going to be increasing their rents in the future. So as a tenant, you need to be aware of that. If you're getting what looks like a deal today in a newly completed condo, a year from now, a year and a half from now, if rents rebound, that rent is not locked in, and technically your landlord can increase the rent as much as they want if we find ourselves in a more constrained rental market a year and a half or 2 years down the road. So those are the key things to keep an eye on. So we might see, again, a soft rental market probably for most of this year. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for the market to absorb all the inventory. But once we do, longer term, it's again, we're going to have this tension and this problem where completions are starting to start to slow down. We're not going to, our starts are slowing down. So we're going to have continue this imbalance between supply and demand. I think I've talked about how we might see changes with respect to the demand for rentals because of the cap on international students. That's more likely going to impact not so much condominiums. It's more likely going to be impact a lot of the investors who have low-rise single-family homes who are using them as, effectively rooming houses. Many of those students are not renting, one-bedroom condos for $2,600 a month. It's a completely different market, so different dynamics to keep an eye on. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please post them in the comment section below. Thanks again.